the MLB trade deadline is now over, and boy, was it crazy. And I mean, just to talk about the MLB trade deadline, can't really talk about much without mentioning the Padres, who made a huge splash. Jack, you want to get into what the Padres did at this deadline?
Well, they had the two biggest splashes, in my opinion. First of all, they traded for Juan Soto, and not only did they trade for Juan Soto, they traded for his teammate Josh Bell as well, and they decimated their farm system. The Padres went all in to get into that deal. It's Soto and Bell to the Padres for Mackenzie Gore, C.J. Abrams, Robert Hassel, James Wood, Harleen Susana, and they also threw in Luke Voigt. It was supposed to be Eric Hosmer, and it got transferred over to Luke Voigt. You want to tell that story a little bit? Because that's like the funniest part of the trade deadline to me in general.
Yeah, so the news breaks, and Eric Hosmer is part of the deal. And then it comes out that Eric Hosmer actually, in his contract, he gets a 10-team no-trade list. And the Nationals were on this list, and yet the Padres still included him, even though he was on the trade list, and B, they didn't even say like, "Yo, we're trading you for Juan Soto." Like, you good with that? Like, they kind of just threw him in, and then it was like Eric Hosmer said no, and at first it was unclear whether it would affect the deal or not. It didn't, and then kind of randomly later, Luke Voigt was thrown into this deal to replace Eric Hosmer, and Eric Hosmer was shipped off to the Red Sox, who apparently wasn't on his 10-team no trade list. So I mean, it was kind of crazy when no one knew it was kind of developing, and but Luke Voigt, he cannot be happy with Eric Hosmer right now, because I mean, yeah, I'm sure even San Diego, I can only imagine his response to his first at bat. If he were not to be traded to the Red Sox, he would have been booed crazy. But Luke Voigt definitely not happy with him, and I'm sure he'd have some words if they saw each other in a clubhouse again. But that was the situation with Eric Hosmer. And it was kind of crazy, but I mean, obviously, the main focus of the deal was Juan Soto and Josh Bell for that huge haul of prospects. And kind of like we expected, it was probably the biggest return ever. And I mean, it was chaos when it's happening.
Well, yeah, and let's get into what this means for San Diego. In my opinion, this immediately vaults them into World Series contention. It's hard for them to get past the Dodgers at times, but right now they have a roster to match anyone in the league. You talk about just their big three when Fernando Tatis comes back. It's Soto, Tatis, Machado. They've also added Josh Hader. They've added Brandon Drury. They still have Jake Cronenworth. They've got a ton of other guys, and they've got all that pitching. But just those top three, to be able to add Soto to Tatis and Machado, as well as Josh Bell, who's having a great year, like up and down this lineup, it stacks up to anyone in the league. And I think this is AJ Preller making another big move and saying, you know what? We have a roster that should be winning right now. Let's go and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the message they're sending to everyone. Like, be afraid of us, because we're here to compete. And like Juan Soto said, good luck to the opposing pitchers. And as a Dodge fan, I'm very scared for the Padres, what they have to come. But the series this weekend is going to be fun to watch. Dodgers-Padres. We'll be at a game, so I mean, that'll be fun to watch. But I mean, yeah, like you mentioned, though, that wasn't the only deal that the Padres did. I mean, they also got Josh Hader, who, when he's on, no doubt he's the best closer in baseball. He's had a rough patch as of late, but I mean, to start the season, he was dominant as always, and so that was a huge pickup as well.
And let's get back into what this means for Washington, because I mean, think about the guys they've lost over the past 3 years. Bryce Harper, they've lost Max Scherzer, they still have Strasburg, but they've also lost Anthony Rendon, now Juan Soto, and Josh Bell. They lost Trey Turner last year as well. They have been just absolutely decimated after winning that World Series. It's good to see that they are getting some prospects back, though when you trade a guy like Juan Soto, I think you lose pretty much every deal that you're a part of. Mackenzie Gore, C.J. Abrams, two guys that have played for the Padres that we were like, they're going to be included in any Juan Soto deal. But then also being able to get Hassel, Wood, and then a guy that they're really high on, Harleen Susana, who's 18, 19 years old and could project to be a good major leaguer down the road. I think Washington's happy with this return. It's just hard to look at that and say, would you rather have these prospects or literally a top 5 player who's 23 years old? And Josh Bell. It's a tough thing for the Nationals, and I feel bad for all Nationals fans because it's going to be a long road back, but at least there are some pieces there that they should be excited about.
It makes sense to get rid of Josh Bell because I think it was a 1-year deal. He was going to be gone. I mean, obviously your window wasn't this year, but I think if you're the Nationals and Nationals fan, I think you have to be happy because, I mean, you mentioned all those players they gave up, or they lost, rather, and gave up for some of them, but, I mean, you also got to take into account it was an unsuccessful team. They won a World Series out of it. So I mean, yeah, they couldn't create a dynasty, but I mean, you got to be happy with the World Series, and obviously the return you're getting back. It's not like you let Scherzer, Turner, Bell, and Soto walk. You got prospects for obviously Scherzer and Turner in the same trade, and then now Soto and Bell. So I mean, you got a huge haul of prospects back, and so hopefully they can develop those, and then in a few years we'll see them be competitive again. But I mean, I feel like you have to be happy. Obviously, it sucks to lose Soto, like you mentioned. He's a top 5 player, but I mean, the return is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think I definitely like this return more than the one they got last year for Turner and Scherzer. I just thought like Ruiz and Josiah Gray. Like, Ruiz was going to be a good MLB catcher. Josiah Gray probably wasn't going to be a frontline starter. And to give up Trey Turner, who had a year and a half left, and then Scherzer, who had half a year left, I didn't like that return as much. This one, though, you can definitely see the potential for this to kickstart a big rebuild for the Nationals. You add Gore to Josiah Gray. Those two can be either your 1 and 2 starters or 2 and 3 starters for a while. CJ Abrams going to slide into shortstop, I would assume, immediately for the Nationals. And then Hassel and Wood are big upside prospects that the Nationals are going to carry. I know their farm system jumped up a lot. They added a bunch to their top 30 prospects, a couple to the top 100. I think that the Nationals have to be excited, and I like this return a lot more than I liked what they got last year, but it's still tough. Let's get into some of the other trades, though. That specific Josh Hader one, they got Taylor Rogers, or I guess the Brewers got Taylor Rogers, Dinelson Lamet, who's already been DFA'd, Esteury Ruiz, and one more guy, Robert Gasser. Weird for you that the Brewers traded Josh Hader when they're still competing for the division?
I think it was, but at the same time, I think it's also, I don't know, makes sense, but I understand it, because I obviously it's the Brewers are a smaller market, so they weren't going to pay Josh Hader when the contract came up, and even arbitration for the next, I think it's 2 or 3 years, I don't know, 2 years maybe, is still going to be very expensive. So I mean, you do save some money there. But I mean, yeah, it's tough to give up Josh Hader, but the return is good. I like the return for it. Taylor Rogers, who's a back end of the bullpen guy. They still have Devin Williams to close, who just gave up a walk-off bomb yesterday to Brian Reynolds. But they DFA'd Lamet, which I was kind of confused by. I think he has high upside. He did a couple years ago when he kind of was debuting, but I think they still could have made something out of it. Interesting that they DFA'd him. And then 2 prospects, so it was kind of interesting to see that they were selling in a sense, because I think 2 other guys, I forget who it was, Colton Wong and one other player was also on the block they were trying to sell. So it was interesting to see a first place team sell. But I do like this return for the Brewers, and it makes, I understand it. I'm not going to say it makes sense, though.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, everyone's been saying that they don't think that Josh Hader is going to re-sign with the Brewers, so it makes sense to get something when you do have value. It's just still, it's a weird look for a team that was supposed to get better at the deadline if they want to continue to soar above the Cardinals. I feel like neither them or the Cardinals did that, but at least the Cardinals didn't go out and trade like their all MLB level closer away. So it's just a weird look for a team that's in a pennant race pretty much. So they're trying to win the NL, trying to get to their first World Series in a while and vault themselves above these teams like the Dodgers, Padres, Cardinals, Mets, and Braves. I just don't think they did that, and I don't think selling Josh Hader makes it any easier for them to get through that stretch. 2 big pitcher trades, though, in the American League. We have Frankie Montas and Lou Trevino going to the Yankees, and then Luis Castillo to the Mariners. Which one of these deals did you prefer more?
I thought the Luis Castillo one was very interesting, because that was the first big trade that we saw, and with the return that the Reds got was ridiculous for that. I mean, it was Noelvi Marte, Edwin Arroyo, Moore, and Stout. So I mean, that was, I mean, Noelvi Marte was the Mariners' #1 prospect. So I mean, to give it up for Luis Castillo, who, yeah, he gives you better playoff hopes, but I don't think he's a Juan Soto type ad where where you're vaulted into World Series contention for the Mariners. So yeah, they're getting an ace, but I mean, they gave up their #1 prospect and then 3 other prospects as well. So I mean, that was a very interesting one. It kind of set the tone for some other trades, and we're like, okay, so this is what kind of the returns are going to look like, and it kind of saw a dead point in trades for the next couple of days before it started to heat up the day before and the day of the deadline. But I mean, I thought that return for the Reds was a huge win, and it was a very interesting trade for the Mariners, who kind of gave up a lot. And I mean, maybe they had to outbid teams like the Yankees, who were big on Castillo, but I mean, it was a huge return. But the Mariners got their guy.
Yeah, so they actually ended up giving up 2 top 100 prospects. I learned yesterday when I was doing the research for the biggest winners of the trade deadline that Edwin Arroyo, also a top 100 prospect, down in that late 80s mark. So the Mariners giving up 2 top 100 prospects to add Castillo, as well as 2 other guys. You're right, it did set the tone. I mean, that's when the Giants said, okay, we'll listen on Carlos Rodon if we can get top 100 level prospects out of teams. That's when Noah Syndergaard's name started to be out there a little bit more. Tyler Mahle was getting shopped around a little bit more. I think everyone looked at that deal and was like, dude, if we can get Noelvi Marte level guys for pitchers with some control, we're totally open to selling. So that was definitely interesting to watch. And then the next big kind of shoe to fall was Frankie Montas and Lou Trevino to the Yankees. The Yankees missed out on Castillo and kind of immediately pivoted. You just knew they had to get Frankie Montas, and they gave up, in my opinion, a lot better of a package than what the Mariners had to give up for Castillo. Give up Sears, Waldichuk, Medina, and Bowman. Waldichuk is the big name in that. I think he slots in as the 3rd prospect for the A's now, and I think he's in the top 100. But they didn't have to give up the level of the guys that the Mariners did, and I think Frankie Montas and Lou Trevino may be a better lump sum than Luis Castillo on their own.
Yeah, I think it was, but it was a great ad for the Yankees, who got, I'd say, mid to late back-end reliever, as well as Frankie Montas, who is going to be your game 2 starter in a playoff series. So it was a great ad for the Yankees, and it was kind of a need that they needed to address. That they've had some very good production out of pitching this season, but it was kind of like you needed another ace to slot behind Garrett Cole in a series. So they went out and got Montas for that. We'll see how he pitches for the Yankees. But I mean, I like this move for the Yankees. Get another bullpen arm. So I think the Yankees did a great job. They went out and said, you know what? They didn't get Soto. They got Benintendi, which was another one very early in the trade deadline process. But I mean, overall, the Yankees, they added some good pieces, and they're another team to look out for.
Let's get into some other moves. We've got the Phillies traded for Thor, Noah Syndergaard, and David Robertson. The Trey Mancini and Christian Vasquez to the Astros, who had a good deadline. Tyler Mahle, who I mentioned, went to the Twins, along with Jorge Lopez from the Orioles. And then also your Dodgers trade for Joey Gallo. Brandon Drury, we mentioned, goes to the Padres. Raisel Iglesias, a surprise trade to the Atlanta Braves. And then one other surprise was Jordan Montgomery from the Yankees, traded straight up for Harrison Bader to the Cardinals. Which one of these moves stuck out to you? I'm sure that we'll talk about Joey Gallo going to the Dodgers, but what other moves stuck out to you?
I mean, the Brandon Drury one is a very underrated pickup for the Padres. Talk about that real quick. I mean, he's having a career year, and it kind of fell by the wayside because obviously all the other Padres moves we mentioned, Juan Soto, Josh Bell, and Josh Hader. I mean, those 3 guys kind of headlined it, but watch out for Brandon Drury. He's having a career year, and in his first at-bat with the Padres just yesterday, he had a grand slam, he introduced himself. He's like, hey, Padres fans, don't forget about me. So that was a very solid pickup, and I really like that one. It was I think they gave up a pretty good prospect for him. I forget the name, but I mean, another good pickup for the Reds for a guy who was on a 1-year contract, a cheap contract who you probably have to pay some more if you wanted to keep him. But it was a good return for the Reds for a guy who's having a career year.
I think that one's crazy too, because you just look at the lineup and the roster that the Padres have, and you go like, where do they want him to play? They've got Josh Bell at first, Jake Cronenworth at second, Manny Machado at third, and Tatis at short. Is Drury just going to DH for them and sometimes play an infield role? Like, he was one of the bigger names on the deadline for some teams. I thought he could have been a splash move for teams like the Mariners and other teams like that, and yet the Padres are going to have him in a relegation role where they're just going to use his bat sometimes and play him in the field. I just thought, like, the assortment of riches that the Padres brought in is comparable to no one else in the league. Like, they, by far, had the best haul of the trade deadline. To have a guy like Brandon Drury maybe fit into their team as a DH, I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, he'll also slot into the outfield, too. I'm sure he'll kind of platoon almost in the outfield with Grisham, maybe, and just playing some left field. Left, maybe a little center too, but DH mainly is what I see for Drury. But yeah, I mean, the lineup's ridiculous. There's guys who are very versatile, like Drury, Cronenworth, Profar. So I mean, like I mentioned, this team is scary coming up on October.
One other move that I wanted to talk about, which kind of surprised me, was Raisel Iglesias, who just re-signed with the Angels for a pretty large amount of money, traded to the Braves, and it's not like they're trading for a closer because they already have Kenley Jansen, so they're getting a reliever who's getting paid among the top closers in baseball to be a setup man for them. I just thought it was interesting that the Angels moved him, and also was really interesting that the Braves in their current scenario traded for him.
I think the Angels are more of a interesting point on this for me because what it kind of says to me is we're done. Like we're not going to finish out this contract. Like we're kind of tearing it down, going for a rebuild. So it makes me excited for this offseason of where we can maybe Shohei gets traded. So I mean, they didn't do it this deadline, but I mean, like you said, giving a top paid closer, and I mean, even for they didn't even get a return out of it, like that good a return. I mean, it was Jesse Chavez who was kind of just clearing up a roster spot for Raisel Iglesias, and then Tucker Davidson, he's been in the majors a couple times, but he hasn't really been a huge factor for the Braves. And now the Braves get Raisel Iglesias, who's a back-end type of open guy, and I mean, yeah, it was a good pickup. I mean, I guess their return was not having to pay the contract, and now it's on the Braves, who, I mean, Alex Anthopoulos is doing crazy with some extensions. That's a whole different story. He signed Austin Riley to a 10-year extension for, I think it was like $21 a year. But I mean, I like this pickup for the Braves. I mean, they also lost Will Smith. I think Raisel's an upgrade for your setup role. So I mean, the Braves they're serious about trying to repeat.
And there's a good chance that they do. Of course, they're in that big battle with the Mets. I believe there's a series this week that could turn a lot of heads. What do you say?
It's a 5-game series.
That's insane. That's the second 5-game series we've seen this week, too, because the Padres right now are going for a sweep of the 5-game series versus the Rockies today, which would be crazy. One more thing I want to talk about the deadline. There were some notable omissions off of the trade deadline block. I mean, Wilson Contreras, Ian Happ both didn't get traded. Carlos Rodon, Jock Peterson didn't get traded. No one off the Rockies really got traded, like C.J. Cron and Daniel Bard, who they decided to extend instead of trade. Was it surprising to you to see all these guys not get traded, and what do you think the thought process was behind some of them?
I have no clue. Daniel Bard was one of the bigger ones for me. I don't know why they extended him. Just the Rockies in the past few years have made some questionable because they didn't trade Story last year either, and they traded Arenado for like a bag of chips a few years ago.
All to go out and sign Chris Bryant to a massive contract.
I got the feeling I could run the Rockies better than whoever's running the Rockies right now. That was a big one for me, but also the Cubs. Ian Happ and Contreras not moved. I think the biggest factor in that was they set their high asking price. No one met it. And instead of trying to get something for them, they got nothing. But I think for Wilson Contreras, I mean, he's expressed interest to re-sign. So maybe they keep Contreras, but we'll see what happens with Ian Happ. But I mean, it was interesting. Can at least get some return for Contreras, and then maybe he even re-signs with you after that for a season. Like now, you're not going to use him for any good the rest of this season. So those two were head scratchers. For the Giants, I mean, Rodon and Jock, I mean, they were in no man's land kind of. I think they're 4.5 back or 5.5 back of the wild card now after 3 straight losses to the Dodgers.
7 straight losses to the Dodgers.
Yeah, that's true. But so I mean, now it's not looking as good at the deadline. You know, you were 3.5, 4.5 ish back, so you still had a chance, and you were kind of in the like, should we trade? And I think for the Giants, it was probably they didn't get the return they wanted for at least Rodon, and it makes sense. I mean, maybe there's still a chance he opts into the second year. But so Rodon, it makes sense to not trade him if you didn't like the returns you were receiving for offers. But I mean, the biggest ones were the Rockies and Cubs not trading their guys were head scratchers to me.
Yeah, especially when you see the Blue Jays, they trade a top 100 prospect for 2 Marlins relievers, and we know they were in on Ian Happ, and they ended up shifting to Whit Merrifield when Happ wasn't traded. But if you're the Cubs, like, you don't want to possibly a top 100 prospect for Ian Happ. You don't want to trade him to the Dodgers, who traded for Joey Gallo instead. You want to trade him to all these other teams that might have been interested. Contreras, I understand, because he's like one of those lifetime Cubs. The last real remaining member of that World Series team that people will remember. But Ian Happ is like, I don't know. I don't get the same like Cubs legend status out of Ian Happ. And there were clearly people that were interested, and there were clearly people interested in Contreras as well. I was just surprised that neither of them got moved, and there were really no like late rumors as well where it seemed like it was heating up at all. So my guess is the Cubs were just kind of they just didn't want to discuss trade, which makes no sense to me because they clearly are not a good baseball team. They're clearly not going to be a good baseball team for a while because their farm system isn't even all that good. So why not trade one of the two? I understand it's hard to part with guys that helped you in the past, but I think that the Cubs definitely should have moved. And those were two guys that everyone was just certain. I was at a Giants-Cubs game last week, and I was like, I would not be surprised if they're traded mid-game, and they pinch hit for Contreras, or pinch ran for Contreras. I'm like, that could be for a trade. Neither of them ended up being traded. It was just really weird to me.
It definitely was. I mean, the whole trade deadline was kind of chaos with Juan Soto being traded and just all the guys that were traded, not traded. It was just crazy to see. I mean, there were some big winners. If you want to go see our 5 winners, we just posted it to our TikTok. You know the deal. The plug. Go find it in the description. But, I mean, trade deadline was crazy. Any last things you want to say about the trade deadline?
I cannot believe the Dodgers traded for Joey Gallo. I mean, that's just... And he'll probably end up being good for the Dodgers, but just, like, the optics of it is just so funny.
It was, and I feel like it kind of solidifies that Joey Gallo is going to hit a big home run in the postseason against or in the World Series against the Yankees. I think it's bound to happen now. But I like the pickup, and he's starting tonight against the Giants, so see how he does in a new uniform, but we'll see.
It's going to be like 4 strikeouts, but he's going to hit 1 game-winning home run.
He's going to hit one, like, so far into the ocean.
The one time he makes contact all day, it's going to go very far.